Here's a look at what the Atlantic looks like right now. You can see that 10% chance from Invest 94L, not likely to develop. Tropical Storm Florence with 65-mile-an-hour winds. Tropical Depression 9 with 35-mile-an-hour winds. And what we're discussing in this update, Helene, which is near the Cape Verde Islands with winds of 45 miles an hour and a pressure of 1001. As you can see, a tropical storm warning and a hurricane watch are in effect for the three southernmost islands, Santiago, Fogo and Brava, I believe they're called. And you can see the storm is expected to intensify beyond the islands, becoming a hurricane for a time and then moving towards the north. As far as we know at the minute, there is no threat to the western Atlantic coastlines from this storm. We expect that it will recurve. This is the tropical storm wind probabilities. They did appear briefly and there they are again. You can see what they're looking like right now. A lot of the southernmost Cape Verde Islands there, 50% chance or more for tropical storm force winds, and those are the only areas under any kind of threat from the storm right now. This is how Helene looks on satellite imagery. If we can get the outlines to show up, you can see the islands just to the northwest there and the African continent on the right hand side. It's still in between the two. Not very many storms develop in this particular area. I believe it was the 6th furthest east to become a named storm, or possibly in the top 5. I'm not entirely sure. It's close anyway, and not moving particularly quickly at this time either. This imagery goes on for around a 3-hour spell. That's how it's looked on infrared. Here's the visible. Looking a little bit empty towards the center there, but you can see some significant convection on the western side in particular, and that band to the south as well. The islands themselves not particularly being affected by this storm yet, and you can see quite interestingly, I just wanted to get that imagery up further north, you can see that dry air exiting the African continent with the storm as well, so I do wonder whether that's going to start to have an impact, because there is, as you can see quite clearly, a lot of that moving along too, and storms hate dry air and definitely Saharan dust. And this is the water vapor imagery. I mean, it was visible on the visible imagery anyway, but you can see drier air towards the northwest, and the storm itself is in a rather moist environment, so it's doing pretty well. And the Cape Verde Islands will be affected by this storm very soon. In the next few hours there could be significant rainfall which could cause flooding and landslides, and also tropical storm force winds 45 miles an hour sustained so far. There could be higher gusts, but I would imagine that the main threat is rain unless the storm intensifies quickly, and that's why there's a hurricane watch out there at the moment. So let's explore whether hurricane conditions are likely, whether it's likely to intensify very much. Here are the sea surface temperatures. You can just about make out the islands there towards the center of your image. 26 degrees or so there, maybe 27 in one or two small areas. Certainly warm enough for a tropical cyclone, but whether it's strong enough for a developing hurricane, we'll see. Not too bad though. And this is what the models are saying as we put them all side by side. You can see they're all calling for a peak pretty much at the same time there, late on the 10th. That's as it's moving out to sea in the eastern Atlantic. One or two models even saying it will get to major hurricane status. Well, that is pretty unlikely, but you never know in the eastern Atlantic. We just saw what Florence did, and there is some decent agreement there that it's going to get at least to a high-end Category 1. And I think that's what the National Hurricane Center is saying pretty much on their forecast. What you can see is how those are going, that the intensity goes down again towards the end of that 5-day forecast, and that's because the wind shear is going through the roof towards the end of that forecast period, and the sea surface temperatures take a little drop as well, especially if the storm moves further north than expected. Relative humidity also takes a nosedive too, so it makes you wonder whether Helene will last very long beyond the islands and beyond that peak on day 3. If it does, these are what the long-range models are saying, the ensembles here, and you can see what they're all saying. It's not too bad an agreement. At least one thing is for sure, that it's going to stay away from the US and Bermuda, but you can't rule out the storm going on to affect the Azores later on, perhaps, as it moves off on its recurvature towards the northeast. But the next 4 or 5 days are pretty much set in stone on where the storm is expected to go, veering towards the west-northwest, and then that curve after day 4 is in a little bit more doubt. This is what the HWRF says. It thinks the storm will do pretty well in the next few days, passes the islands, becomes a Category 3. This is simulated radar imagery. It's not real. It is a simulation from the model, and you can see what it expects. Up to Category 1 by this stage. You can see it's just left the islands on the right hand side, and then it goes up to Category 2 by now, and briefly touches Category 3 status possibly, and then rapidly weakens after that. And very little left of it by the last frame there. The HMON is calling for not quite as strong a storm, but still saying a maximum of 90 knots, which is 105 miles an hour, and more notably a little bit further south than the HWRF as well, which may give it a bit more of a chance later on before it goes on that recurve. But the HMON showing no signs of a recurve in that next 5 days, but it could happen a little bit later. As far as I know, there are no indications at all that this storm will reach the western part of the Atlantic. So in summary, Helene is a potentially dangerous storm, especially for the Cape Verde Islands, who aren't particularly used to systems like this. They are quite rare. If anyone remembers Fran of 1984, it could be a little bit like that, the worst case scenario, or maybe even worse if it becomes even stronger. No signs that it is gathering momentum just yet, but it has winds of 45 miles an hour sustained, higher gusts, and there could be copious amounts of rainfall for the southernmost Cape Verde Islands of Brava, Fogo and Santiago, which could also receive tropical storm conditions and a hurricane watch for those islands as well, just in case. That's all for now. We'll have more on Helene as conditions warrant.